Hey guys, welcome to your study of the New Deal. We just finished a lesson on the Great Depression, so that's to be followed up by Roosevelt's approach to handling the problems of the Great Depression. And throughout this section, throughout this chapter, I want you to be thinking about Hoover and how he dealt with the Great Depression, and then what you learned here about Roosevelt and how he dealt with the Great Depression. There is an activity later on in this chapter asking you to compare the two, compare and contrast, really, and then answer a few other questions. But let's go ahead and move on with Roosevelt's the New Deal policies. There are your objectives. Now, before Roosevelt was elected president, he was the governor of the state of New York, and he instituted several New Deal programs that worked for the time in New York State. And so with that experience, he runs his campaign and runs it pretty well. And with Hoover's popularity declining rapidly because his seemingly unwillingness to not do anything to help anybody, Roosevelt wins pretty easily. So Roosevelt's in office now, and let's take a look at his approach. His first big issue is the banking crisis. We have all kinds of banks closing. 38 banks across the United States had closed or had set up restricted hours. So his first response is to close every bank in the United States, regardless of the situation. Close them all. He and a committee evaluate them, and he decides only to reopen those banks that are the strongest. Now, again, we've been talking about laissez-faire government and how the government has begun to move into this regulatory agency, and it's with F.D.R. That the government really becomes a full-fledged regulatory agency of everything in the United States. I mean, and I guess in some ways it was necessary because of the economic situation at the times. It was necessary for the government to step in and to regulate something. Unfortunately, the power that the federal government took upon itself during the Great Depression and through the New Deal policies has never been relinquished. So it's a huge negative effect from this time period. Roosevelt becomes known for his fireside chats. Literally, he would be videotaped or audio taped sitting in the White House. Eleanor would be across the way sewing. Mom would be across the way nodding her head in approval of what F.D.R. says. Yes, Mom lived in the White House with Franklin. He uses the radio to get these messages out to the people. And in our last unit, we talked about how during the Roaring 20s, 40% of American homes had radios by 1929. And so he uses this media to get information out to the public. Now, it's not like media broadcast today. It's not like State of the Union addresses today, where it seems like the president is talking down to us. It doesn't matter if it's the current president or whoever. It seems like every State of the Union, they use such vernacular that it's almost like they're only talking to Congress themselves, and we, the people, don't understand, so it doesn't really matter. Also, Roosevelt did not talk in a manner of a typical president. He didn't use lawyer speak. He didn't use big words just to make himself sound intelligent. He literally talked to you as if you and he were the only two people sitting in the room, and he was explaining what the government was trying to do. So his very first fireside chat was on the banking industry, the bank situation as it was, and the reason why he did what he did, what he planned to do, and how it was going to help. And in the very next slide, there's going to be a YouTube video pop up, and the way Prezi works, it wants to automatically play that YouTube, and that's all well and good if you're watching just the Prezi without audio. So after you watch this, I encourage you to go back and watch the Prezi, or fast forward through the Prezi to get to the YouTube video. As it is, I'm going to advance the slide here and then advance the slide again very quickly just to bypass it so we don't run into the YouTube video itself. Another major issue after the banking crisis is job crisis. People want jobs. People are out of work, and that's their big concern. help us. Don't give us a handout. We don't want handouts. There was still a pride in the United States that did not want a welfare type situation where you just walk up and receive money. They prefer to work. They prefer to earn it, because that pride, that sense of pride, was still there. Unfortunately, missing in today's day and age. But that's what they wanted. Give us a job. Give us a way to earn our money. And so these are some agencies in which Roosevelt, during his first and second New Deal, created certain agencies. And off to the right of each agency, I've given you an idea of what area they were designed, or what area they were focused on. So the 3 C's was focused on relief and job creation. The NRA was focused on regulating industries. TVA, farm and rural regulation, or farm and rural area improvement. Specifically, the only one program that was designed for a very specific section of the country. AAA is farm rural improvement. CWA, relief job creation. PWA, relief job creation. F.D.R, relief. Social Security is relief. WPA, relief job creation. NYA, relief. So the overwhelming, if you just look at that, you can see relief, 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 job creation, job creation, job creation. So you can see the primary goal of Roosevelt's New Deal is provide relief to the people, give them jobs, get them back on their feet, because that's the best way to kickstart your economy, is to create jobs. The AAA, designed to reduce crop production, eliminate the surplus. Remember, the surplus was a big issue. The demand was not meeting supply, and so prices were extremely low. Roosevelt's committee decides on 7 agricultural areas: wheat, cotton, corn, hogs, rice, tobacco, and dairy. In those areas, the government agreed to pay farmers to stop producing. Just let that sink in. The government is going to pay you to not farm your land. The government is going to pay you to not grow corn. They're going to pay you to not grow cotton or wheat, or to raise hogs. You're going to get a government subsidy for not doing what you do. As a result, prices do increase. Unfortunately, this favors the large farmers, because it's the large farmers who determine the 7 areas that were going to be the focus. And so we see this helping only the powerful farmers. Subsidies that are being paid, they're being paid to landowners. And so those landowners, in turn, since they're not growing crops, or they're being paid to not grow crops, they evict the tenant farmers. They do away with the sharecroppers. They fire their workers. And so it creates even more unemployment as a result. In 1936, the Supreme Court rules the AAA to be unconstitutional, specifically the area in which the government has no constitutional authority to require farmers to limit their production. Doesn't matter, though, because F.D.R has another plan that comes right back around, and it essentially does the same thing. It's just not called the AAA, but it does the exact same thing a little bit later on in the second New Deal. Along the area of farm or rural assistance, we see the Resettlement Administration and the Farm Securities Administration. These two programs essentially do the same thing. They provide loans to farmers who want to relocate to areas of better soil. This is in regards to the Dust Bowl region. A lot of farmers in Oklahoma and Kansas were experiencing an extreme drought, and so all the topsoil was being blown away. So the government was offering loans to these people to relocate and continue their life as farmers. Neither of those programs helped more than a few thousand farmers across the country, so very, very little impact. What did have a big impact is the REA, Rural Electrification Administration. This provides electricity to the rural areas of the country, trying to bring all those areas up into the modern age, so to speak. And this actually helps more than any other farm agency did. National Industrial Recovery Act, as you can tell, focuses on industry. Quick look back. Hoover was not willing to suspend antitrust laws to enact a period of inflation. He was not willing to do that to the American economy. Remember, it was Hoover who wanted to maintain and did maintain a balanced budget throughout the early stages of the Great Depression. When Roosevelt becomes president, he is more than willing to negotiate a suspension of the antitrust laws. However, he makes it very clear that if I do this, then the government's going to have a lot more power in regards to regulating industries, such as Roosevelt makes sure that the business owners, the industry types, recognize the workers' right to collective bargain with unions, that the owners increase pay for workers as the prices increase. So this is the government's way of controlling industry a little more tightly. The NIRA, National Industrial Recovery Act, creates the National Recovery Administration. And the the NRA almost immediately calls for a minimum wage nationwide of 30 to 40 cents per hour and a maximum work week of 35 to 40 hours, a complete abolition of child labor, and also it set codes, floors, if you will, that no company can fall below in regards to prices or wages in order to gain a competitive advantage. Troubles with the NIRA from the very beginning: the codes are written very vaguely. The codes are written by powerful companies that benefit the powerful companies, and the officials who are to regulate the NIRA and the NRA are too inexperienced to monitor such a large task. NIRA also creates the PWA. I'm getting tongue-tied with all these alphabet soup programs. PWA is literally the Public Works Administration. It literally created jobs in the public sector. It was designed to spend the money in the NIRA's budget, but it only allowed a little bit of money to trickle out at the very, very beginning. By the time it's all said and done, I think $3.8 billion was spent, but it's very, very, very slowly. During this time of the NIRA, industrial production actually declines. So they didn't see that coming. They were hoping industrial production would increase, but it actually declines. Once again, the Supreme Court rules against the NRA in a case of the Schechter brothers. This is a loose, I don't know if it's a loose interpretation. Roosevelt thought it was a loose interpretation of the Interstate Commerce Act. Essentially, the Schechter brothers worked only in Brooklyn, New York, and so they were not an interstate commerce business. They worked only within the state. So according to interstate commerce laws, the federal government has no right to regulate this business. But under the NIRA, the government is regulating this business with child labor and collective bargaining and all these things up here. So the Supreme Court says this is not a federal jurisdiction here. This is a state jurisdiction, and as a result, rules the NRA to be unconstitutional. In terms of the finance system, Roosevelt does remove the United States from the gold standard. Congress later approves that by passing legislation. There's no immediate impact on the Great Depression. The impact is found later through this precedent that the government establishes the value of the dollar bill based on the economy. The government then has a precedent to increase or decrease the value of the dollar bill, essentially as it sees fit. Now, it's supposed to be based on economic circumstances, but the government now has the precedent, has the example set that they can raise the value of dollar. Now, today's dollar is based on worldwide trade. We're far more involved in worldwide trade than we ever have been, and so the value of our dollar is based on something even more scary, what our trade partners believe the value of the dollar to be. In finance, we see the Glass-Steagall Act, and the most important part of the Glass-Steagall Act is that it creates the FDIC program, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This basically guarantees your savings, your checking, your money in the bank, starting at $2,500 and up. Today, I believe FDIC guarantees your deposits of up to $250,000. So, if a bank were to close for whatever reason, and you've got $250,000 in a bank, you're going to be guaranteed to get that money back. It's an insurance program that you will get all $250,000 back. Now, if you have $500,000 in that bank and that bank shuts down, you're only going to get $2,500 or $250,000 back. You're not getting the full 500. So that's why you see a lot of wealthy investors or a lot of people with a lot of money. They diversify. They use a lot of different banks to put their money into because of this FDIC thing. More finance. We see Truth in Securities Act. As companies make their shares of stock available to public investors, they have to have full disclosure of its stock holdings. One of the biggest causes of the Great Depression was the stock market crash, and the big time investors, the people who were in the stock market for long term, not the people who are trying to make it rich quick and get out, but the people who knew the stock market. They knew things were going bad. It was these people who were dumping millions of shares back into the market. And the reason it hurt the small-time investors is because they had no idea of what was going on. So Truth in Securities Act dictates that if a company, say Walmart, knows that it is not going to be doing very well, it has to disclose that information to its shareholders, from the wealthiest shareholders to the shareholder who has one share of Walmart. Everybody gets the exact same information, and then it's up to that individual shareholder to decide whether they keep the stock or they dump it or they sell it back onto the market. And then finally, the SEC is created to investigate fraud in the stock market. The best example I can think of the SEC still in action today would be in relation to the Truth in Securities Act and the case involving Martha Stewart. She was an investor in some company. She used inside knowledge, what we call insider trading, to learn that the company was going to go out of business, and so she, with that knowledge, sold all of her stock. A few others did as well. Well, then the company goes out of business, and then small-time investors lose their money because they had invested in it. An investigation by the SEC turned up that, yes, they knew what was going on, and they used that information to benefit themselves to sell their stock while the stock prices were still at a relatively high price. Meanwhile, the people who don't have that insider information basically lost everything they had invested in the company. And so what's her name? She spent a little bit of time in jail. Minimum security, I think it was about a year or less. But Martha Stewart, she still had to pay the price. In regards to federal relief, this is the one area in which Roosevelt and Hoover completely disagreed on. Again, Hoover believed it was not the federal government's job. It's a state and local job to provide federal relief. Hoover encouraged local charities to create community chests to help out the citizens of their local communities. Roosevelt, on the other hand, made it a federal program, made it the government's top priority to help those in need. He did, to his credit, only want to do it until the economy becomes stabilized. Unfortunately, it created a system of people dependent upon the government's service. And even though welfare back in the Great Depression day was not meant to be a handout, it turned out to be that as generations passed on. Some of the federal relief agency programs created are the F.D.R. This gave cash grants to bail out bankrupt relief agency, basically just putting money into the problem. That does not work. The CWA, work relief, temporary work projects, literally making up work just so people have a job to do. Now, the CWA is responsible for a lot of good things, such as building roads and bridges and schools. But a lot of what the CWA did was little make-work projects like, well, let's go rake the leaves in the park today. Let's paint the park benches tomorrow. Let's paint the fire hydrants the next day after that. literally making things up as they went along, and eventually that runs out because those make work projects um, are all all done. They can't come up with any new jobs. The three C's is what some historians call Roosevelt's most favorite program. My dad was a part of this. It's the Civilian Conservation Corps, taking young men ages 18 to 25 away from their homes so they're not a burden to their families. Then they put them in a semi-military style camp, and these camps were set up in national parks. And in these national parks, these young men would go to work, and they would clean up the parks, and they'd plant trees, and they'd develop parks within the national park. They'd build reservoirs, they'd build bridges. Because the men are living in semi-military style camps, they're far away from most urban areas. They don't need money. So when they do get their weekly or monthly paycheck, my dad told me it was a weekly paycheck. So he was able to keep $5 for himself should they end up, being taken into a nearby town, and the rest of his money was sent home. They got everything they needed for them at the camp. It was, like I said, it was a military, so they got their meals at the camp. They slept at the camp. Again, ages 18 to 25, and a lot of the men working in the three C's stay in the three C's right up until World War II, and then they just go right into the military. The HOLC, Home Owners Loan Corporation, refinances mortgages for over 1 million householders who were in foreclosure, so it gives them money to keep their homes, to stay in their homes. And the WPA, very similar to the CWA, again helping with job creation and unemployment. Again, it's similar to the CWA, but it has a much bigger budget. Now, within the WPA, we see very important programs like the Federal Riders Project. This took a group of people who was not being met by other relief programs, the artists, and gave them something to do. So we see a lot of artists and musicians and playwrights and actors actually getting to do their trade and putting on plays, and you'll see pictures if you do a little search on Google. Just type in type in WPA, and you'll probably find photos of plays being sponsored by the WPA. Projects, murals, huge murals on sides of buildings, sponsored by the WPA. But most importantly is the Federal Riders Project, and this is where the government sent authors, journalists, out-of-work writers to the South to begin interviewing the former slaves, the freedmen, and collect their stories. And this is probably one of the largest collection in the National Archives today because of this. So a very positive outcome from the WPA. Also from the WPA, the National Youth Administration. This takes high school age and college age boys and girls and gives them scholarships to stay in school and learn a trade. See, a lot of people were dropping out of school to try to find work, and they would leave home and hop on the trains and go from town to town. So this provides a program for them to stay in school and to earn a trade, learn a trade. In the area of Social Security, we still have it today. Social Security was designed for two reasons: to help people who were out of work and needed help immediately. They were given $15 a month, no cell phones though, no Obama phones. And also to help people who were currently working establish a retirement pension system. They pay a payroll tax. Their employers pay a payroll tax, and then that money is put into a retirement pension system. And upon retirement, then they would receive monthly disbursements of that until their until death, essentially. There's a fear that Social Security, the way it's designed, is going to run out of money because of just various things. People, the baby boomer generation is retiring, and so a lot of those workers are no longer going to be put into the system. There's not enough people today working to pay into the system. So there's a big problem. I think there's some government agencies that have kind of helped themselves to some Social Security money, but again, as it was designed, it was the purpose was to help people in retirement, because the Great Depression affected the elderly pretty badly. They had some money to live on, but when the Great Depression hit, that all went away very quickly. So they have nothing, and they have 15, 20 years left in their lives. It's also, Social Security also establishes unemployment insurance. People who are laid off can receive temporary government assistance, and this is financed completely by employers. Social Security also provides federal aid to people with disabilities, federal aid to dependent children with no parents, and then also, again, the Social Security was a system of insurance, not welfare. The groups receiving the insurance at the time was very, very small compared to what it is today. The system today is completely blown way out of proportion because the total number of people willingly not working, willingly accepting payments, unemployed benefits. All they have to do is go to an interview and claim that they still can't get hired anywhere, and they can collect unemployment benefits. It's the system is broken. It has become a welfare system because of the enormous size. At the time, it was not a welfare system, but because of the size, it has become a true welfare system. Again, the second New Deal is needed because things like the CWA, eventually we run out of jobs, the work ends, so there's only so much they can do. So they have to create a second New Deal. It is believed that had World War II not occurred, Roosevelt had plans for a third New Deal, but he was saved by World War II. The New Deal programs, all of this borrowing of money does create a huge deficit, unlike anything we've ever seen before. It puts the government's deficit at its highest ever, and we've never been able to recover from it. Roosevelt's not tied to an ideology, which is why his program is affected. He's willing to try different things. He's not stuck to one idea. He's extremely willing to expand the size of the government to meet the country's needs. But again, because of that new role for the government, it takes the power of the state and local government to provide for the relief of the citizens of their state, and takes that into the hands of the federal government. And it does create the largest deficit in our history. The New Deal programs do work for a short time. That is F.D.R's legacy. He is saved by World War II. His New Deal programs last for a short time, and then he has to come up with something new. He is saved because the United States gets into World War II. When the United States enters World War II after the attack of Pearl Harbor, our industries go into wartime production. And we've already talked about the business cycle in earlier chapters. Wartime production means people are hired. People are hired means people are getting paid. Paychecks. Paychecks means people are spending money in the economy. And almost, not overnight, but almost overnight, the economy is in a massive rebound. And the Great Depression ends because of that. The Great Depression does not end because of the New Deal programs. It ends because of World War II. And this is a major conspiracy of some World War II veterans and historians alike that believe Roosevelt knew this was the only way to get the United States out of the Great Depression, to allow something horrible to happen to convince people, to convince the United States citizens to get into the war. Because if you look at Gallup polls and polls around the nation at this time, the majority of Americans wanted to stay out of the war. We had our own problems, and we did not want to deal with issues in Europe again. So it's not until December 7th, 1941 that changes, and a lot of people blame Roosevelt for that. Guys, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Enjoy.